Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Adam, Content Marketing Specialist with Schein, and I will be your moderator today. We are joined by Dr. Gary Light. Dr. Light is a practicing dentist for 34 years who successfully transformed a practice dominated by PPOs to a thriving fee-for-service business. Today's webinar is being recorded, and everyone will receive the link of the recording in the next week via email. If you have questions for Dr. Light at any point during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A and we will answer them live at the end of the presentation. This webinar is presented by Schein Dental Business Institute, and no CE credits are being offered for viewing or attending this webinar. With that, thank you, Dr. Light, for being here, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Adam. Thanks for the introduction, and welcome, everyone. Today, I'm going to give you some information that'll be thought-provoking, and I'm also going to provide you with some tools to help you transform your practice to a fee-for-service practice. Okay. Let me give you a little introduction. As Adam mentioned, I'm a practicing dentist. I've been practicing in Providence for 34 years. And when I first joined the practice, which I now own as an associate, the owner of the practice first thing he did was had me sign up for 2 PPOs. They were the 2 PPOs that were dominating the state. Not knowing anything about dentistry and the business of dentistry, and only 4 days out of dental school, I signed on. That was the start of my dental business education. How many of you would agree with this statement? You know, most of us enjoy dentistry, and what we enjoy most about our practice is actually doing dentistry. The big issue is managed care and all the costs of doing business. That's where the conflict starts. Now, when I got into practice 35 years ago, there was enough fat in the system where you didn't have to have a real business acumen to be successful. In fact, you could walk into a bank, you showed them your diploma, and they wanted to give you a mortgage, a car loan, money to start your practice. It was very simple. Every dentist and physician that you met back then was successful. They all made a comfortable living. It's a lot different now. Managed care and the cost of doing business has really impacted the practice of medicine and dentistry. So let's talk a little bit about PPOs. Many dentists join PPOs for a variety of reasons. Most of that is because they automatically get referred to a referral network. They don't have to do any marketing. The PPOs tell you that you don't have to worry about some of the administrative issues, billing the patients, that sort of thing. So when you don't have a business strategy, you default to PPOs. But what are PPOs? PPOs are actually discount dentistry. You're doing the same dentistry that you do for your fee-for-service patients, but you're doing it at a discount. Many times, those discounts are pretty significant. When I first started in practice 35 years ago, the PPO fees were somewhere around 3 to 5% below what our usual and customary fee. Now we're seeing, discrepancies up around 15%. In some cases, even as high as 30% below your usual customary fee. So you'd say, well, what's the big deal about 15%? Well, 15% is a big deal. Most dental offices work at about 70% overhead. So that leaves you 30% profit. If your fees are reduced by 15%, it cuts your profit by 50%. That's 50. Now that's a big deal. People don't realize it. They're approached by these PPOs and they say, oh, we're 10% below your usual and customary fee, but we handle all the billing and the administrative costs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when you start figuring it out dollar-wise, you're really cutting into your profit. So if you're 15% below your usual and customary fee, you're taking a 50% hit. What that means is you have to do twice as much dentistry to make the same money, or think of it this way, the contra to that is you do half the amount of dentistry and make the same money if you drop the PPO. Food for thought. Well, we all know there's problems with discount dentistry. You're all here and listening to this webinar for that very reason. The thing that used to bother me the most is that the PPOs or insurance companies take the position that they don't interfere with the doctor-patient relationship. They say that they don't dictate care. Well, we all know that a lot of our patients decide on treatment or consent to treatment based on their financial position. So indirectly, insurance companies do dictate patient treatment. That always bothered me. So what do we do? What are our survival strategies? And again, everybody who is listening to this webinar is doing, if not some of these things, all of these things. The big thing that stands out is volume-based dentistry. If you are getting if you're making half the profit, well, you got to do twice as much work. That's the running from room to room, working multiple chairs. I did it for 19 years before I decided to drop out of a PPO. You also try to exceed patients' maximums, because once you do, then you're able to charge your usual and customary fee. All that is a means of survival. Well, here's where it began for me. In 2005, I had a catalytic event. I had a fire in my office. Actually, it was in the building that housed my office, and it put me out of work for 8 weeks, much like the big pause here of 2020. Well, it was a time for introspection for me. And I came to the conclusion that I could make a change. I had choices. I could either continue doing dentistry the way I was doing dentistry, participating in PPOs. I could move 1.8 miles from my practice in Providence, Rhode Island to Massachusetts, where the reimbursement from PPOs was higher, or I could transform my practice to a fee-for-service practice and practice dentistry the way I wanted to practice it, the way I was taught in dental school. And that's what I decided to do. So I sent a letter off to the PPOs that I participated in saying I was no longer going to participate. This is where it all began. It's interesting because there's a catalytic event happening for all of you right now, and that's COVID-19. This is a article written by Dr. Chris Salerno. He's the editor of Dental Economics magazine. This was featured in Dental IQ. And Dr. Salerno feels that this is an opportune time to drop PPOs, or certainly the bad PPOs, and he bases it on a supply and demand issue. Since COVID-19 hit and the great, shutdown occurred, a lot of dentists, or a significant amount of dentists, decided not to reopen their practices. And those who did are not seeing the volume of patients or are as productive as they were pre-COVID-19. So he sees it as a supply and demand issue. Patients have less choices where to go. I see it more as an economic issue. I mean, we have now exorbitant PPE costs. We have the slower workflow and lower production. So what is fee-for-service dentistry? Fee-for-service dentistry is getting paid for what you deserve. I can tell you from my own experience, not only is it about getting paid for what you deserve, but the quality of your life gets better. The quality of your dentistry gets better. Why can you provide better quality dentistry? Well, you have more time to spend with your patients. You could afford better materials. You can afford a high quality laboratory, which is a direct reflection of your work. And you can afford to invest in newer technology. So fee-for-service dentistry, I believe you can provide better quality care to your patients. So people ask me all the time, how did you do it? Well, it was basically a 3-step process. The first You have to collect data and analyze your practice. Develop a strategy. You can't go into this blindly. Many dentists who have failed miserably, they failed because they didn't have a strategy. They just cold turkey said, I'm going to drop out of PPOs, and they found themselves really, suffering the consequences. This next step is to implement your strategy. Have a plan how you're going to go about implementing your plan. And then, of course, step 3 is to sustain your success. But before we go into the methodology, let's talk a little bit about the business of dentistry. Very basic business. There are 2 ways to increase profit. One is to increase revenue, the other is to decrease expenses. You can think of your practice as a leaking bucket. If you've got a leaking bucket, how do you solve the problem? You either fix the holes in the bucket or you add more water to the bucket. So let's talk about first about fixing the holes in the bucket. This is some data from a survey from the ADA. Talks about the expenses for a solo practitioner. You'll notice that your top 3 expenses are staff salaries. Labor is always your highest cost. Then you have laboratory fees, and your 3rd highest expenses, dental supplies. Well, in terms of cutting expenses, it's very hard to cut labor. You need a certain amount of people to function efficiently. And remember, your staff is the face of your brand. So, cutting salaries, that's a tough one. Your next is labor. Well, labor's a laboratory rather. Laboratory is a direct reflection of your work. If you're doing quality work, you got to use a quality lab. So that's a tough expense to cut. So let's look at dental supplies. So if you have an average gross production of $600,000, your dental supply cost is roughly 6% of that $36,000. If you can accomplish a 10% savings, which is a significant amount to save, you're saving $3,600. Sounds good, right? I wouldn't argue with that. But let's look at increasing profit by increasing, production profit. Well, if your average gross production is $600,000 and you can increase your fees by 5%, that's a $24,000 increase in profit. So, which do you prefer? Well, the answer is quite straightforward. Reducing expenses really has limited results. The key is increasing profit. The problem you have participating in a PPO is that you're contractually bound to a fee schedule, and you can't raise those fees. Or I suppose there are cases where you can negotiate for higher fees, but it's difficult to accomplish that. That alone, in my opinion, is the reason to drop out of PPOs. So with that said, let's get on to it. That's why you're here. Let's see if I can come up with some information that'll help you figure out your profit plan. The first step is you have to analyze your practice. What does that mean? Well, you got to know your practice, know your environment, and know your patients. So when we talk about knowing your practice, this is all basic accounting things on the slide. And I'll provide you a worksheet later on that addresses this and helps you analyze your practice. All this information is easily obtained using a dental practice software. I'm very familiar with Dentrix. That's a product that Henry Schein supports. And all this information can be obtained in a matter of minutes. You need to know, how many active patients you have. And then you have to break it down, how many are fee for service, with insurance, without insurance, how many patients you have in your PPO. You should know your practice financials. I like to do it on a monthly basis because there are a lot of expenses I pay once a month, so that looking at a monthly analysis gives me a pretty good feel and a finger on the pulse of how my practice is doing month to month. And what's most important, note down below, and this is going to be very important in formulating your profit plan, is your number of procedures by code. Again, your practice software can give you this information. There are reports on procedures per code, and it breaks it down. You'll see why that's important in a minute. You also have to know your environment. Know where your patient base is coming from. For me, I'm in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm on the east side, right near Brown University, RISD University. So I see a lot of people, from those places, and I know what kind of insurance plans they have, and that would affect, any changes you're going to make regarding those particular insurance plans. What I find interesting about knowing your environment, one of the big self-limiting beliefs, and we'll talk about that, is dentists say, well, look, there are too many choices for my patients to go. I can't drop out. All my patients are going to leave me, et cetera, et cetera. My practice is on College Hill, and it's nicknamed Pill Hill, with all the doctors and dentists that are within a very short, concentrated area. Within a 10-block radius of my office, there are 15 dental practices. You would think that that would make it impossible for me to drop out of PPO, because patients would have so many other choices. But you have to analyze those practices near you. Some of those practices may already be saturated and they're not taking new patients. Some of those practices may have dentists who are ready to retire. Some of those practices don't offer the services you offer, which again gives patients limited places to go. So you really have to know your environment. And another thing that's very important is know the fee schedule by zip code. This is going to be important. There is information out there where you can obtain an average fee for your area by zip code. And that's important in developing your business strategy. And lastly, you have to know your patients. Are your patients loyal to you? How do they view your practice? Do you have a transient patient population? Are they committed to good oral health? But most importantly, do they value good dentistry? Because if they value good dentistry, that could be a big sell in your favor in retaining patients when you drop out of PPOs. So let's talk about a profit plan. There are a number of different ways to go about this. It's individual for every practice based on your practice analysis, but I'm going to give you an idea of a profit plan that's very basic and that you can incorporate into your own practice. So let's start with what is going to be your profit plan. And again, it's individual for each practice. The first thing I did in my practice is I add a copay. Now, I call it a copay. So when you drop out of a PPO, you have a number of choices. You can now bring everybody up to your usual and customary fee, but your usual and customary fee may be significantly higher than what the insurance reimbursement is. That could create a lot of sticker shock to your patients. So I looked at the procedure that's done most in my office, and that's a dental prophylaxis. And I said, okay, I'm gonna take that procedure, and instead of bringing it up to my usual and customary fee, which may have a 20% discrepancy or a 30% discrepancy, I'm gonna add a simple copay. And I decided for every patient that was in that PPO that I participated in, I was just going to increase their fee by $15. And I called it a copay. People are used to the phrase copay. They have copays in their medical, with their physicians. They have copays at the pharmacy. So I like the term copay. It's very friendly to the patients. So think about this. If you have 3 hygienists, which I did, seeing 10 patients a day and 20 days per month. Well, let's look at the profit. If 100% of those patients that they see were in your PPO. Well, if you do the math, here it is. You'll see a $150 increase per hygienist per day. You'll see a $450 increase in production per day, a $9,000 increase in production per month, and over $100,000 increase in profit per year. That's very impressive. And what's even more impressive is that you're doing nothing other than increasing and your fee by introducing a copay. That's no increase in overhead. It's doing the same dentistry that's done in your office. It seems so simple, doesn't it? Well, it was so simple that I decided I'm going to add some staff. I was successful at that level. So what did I do? I added another hygienist. So now I've got 4 hygienists seeing 10 patients per day at 20 days per month. Again, the same copay, assuming that these, that they're seeing 100% of your PPO patients. The increase you're going to see in profit is $144,000 a year. That's pretty impressive. Now, granted, if they're not seeing 100% of your PPO patients, maybe they're seeing 50%, but do the math. If they're seeing 50%, your increase is $72,000 a year. Again, you're not adding a whole lot of overhead. And in talking about adding staff, this is the increase in profit just by dropping out of a PPO. That doesn't include the gross production that hygienist is doing. Seems simple, doesn't it? Because it is. This is exactly what I did. This is how I started. One procedure, just one procedure, different than in fee. Now, choosing a full service partner to support your business, this is something that's often overlooked. Henry Schein is a full service provider. They have a wealth of resources and tools that can help you. I really appreciate the fact that my personal Henry Schein rep is readily available. I have his email address. I have his cell phone. He's always within reach when I need him. And he is a source of great information for me. He's in my office, very frequently. He's like the finger in the pulse of what's going on around me, introducing me to new materials, that sort of thing. A full service provider is a valuable commodity. People who make changes like this and transform their practice, they don't do it alone. You need some support. So where do you start? Well, the first place you do is start with yourself. I call this the success mindset. You have to change your way of thinking. You have to adopt this. The first thing is that you have to believe that patients will pay if they value the service. They're willing to pay out of pocket. We're going to talk more about that. And quality treatment deserves a fair fee. Why not? You went to dental school. You're a trained professional. Your services are very valuable. Quality treatment deserves a fair and reasonable fee. The thing that I find interesting about dentists and that they take such pride in being booked so far in advance. I talk to dentists and their practice is heavily saturated with PPO patients. And they're so proud of the fact that they're booked 5 weeks in advance. Solid, can't move. Well, that's not necessarily the sign of a healthy practice. I mean, financially, if they're saturated with PPO patients, they're making a whole lot less money. They don't have room to insert patients with maybe treatment that pays better. They don't have room for new patients that can bring more treatment, and profit into their practice. So being booked 5 weeks in advance, that's not necessarily a reflection of a healthy practice. So what if you were going to lose patients and you're concerned oh, if I lose 20% of my patients or 30% of my patients. The thing you have to remember is you only have to be booked 1 day in advance. As long as you come into work and have a full schedule, you're going to be profitable. Because again, not all your patients are assets. And that speaks to what we call the 80-20 principle. It's also known as the Pareto principle. And what that principle is all about is that it says 80% of the effects are due to 20% of the causes. Well, you know, I look at it in dentistry and I say, well, 80% of the hardship I have in my practice is a result of 20% of the patients. So think about it. What if you were to lose right off the top 20% of those hardships? You would have 80% of you retain 80% of your patients, and they'd be quality patients. That makes for a better experience for you and better dentistry. So I talked about a worksheet. This is the first tool I'm going to give you. It's a worksheet having to do with practice analysis. And as I mentioned earlier, you have to be able to analyze your practice. You have to know production, collection, the average adjustments you're making. And again, I work on a monthly basis. That works well for my practice. But what's important here is, if you look at the bottom, you should list your 10 most frequent procedures. And I'll tell you why this is significant. This is a comparative analysis. If you list, you know, if you change the fee of a procedure that you do most frequently, it's going to have a greater impact than, say, changing the fee of a procedure that you do infrequently. So the most frequent procedure done in my office and most restorative dental practices is a dental prophylaxis. So I use that as an example here. And you saw how effective it was when you saw the profit plan with that hygienist by adding a simple $15 copay. A small incremental change in a procedure that you do most frequently can have a big impact. That's important. It's also important to be competitive with some of your neighbors. So that's where that zip code analysis comes in. Again, you can contact your full service provider. Henry Schein provides that information, and you want to be within the 80th percentile of all, you know, your surrounding dental practices to remain competitive. That's important. And this comparative analysis worksheet helps you calculate your profit. Okay, so now we're ready to move on to implementing your strategy. You've analyzed your practice, you've analyzed your environment, you have a feel for your patients. Now you have to decide how you're going to go about implementing your strategy. Well, your strategies, as I mentioned, the strategy is going to be different for every practice. You know, people say, should I drop out of all PPOs? Should I drop out of just some PPOs? Well, of course, you know, the place to start is your lowest paying PPOs. That's easy. And, you know, are you going to take those patients? Are you going to change your fee schedule to full fee? Are you going to have an abbreviated schedule? Are you going to do what I did, pick selective procedures and only increase with selective procedures? It all differs for every practice, and you have to know your practice to do it. But the one thing all profit plans have in common for all practices are these 5 steps for success. Again, you have to change your mindset. You have to change your billing practices. You have to educate and train your staff, transition your patients to fee for service, and attract new patients. In terms of spending time and energy, the most important thing you have to educate and train your staff. Again, they're the face of your brand. They are going to be the one in contact with your patients. You have to get your staff on board and have them all on the same page. Because let's face it, business is pretty easy. It's people that are hard. You know, Harvard change expert John Cotter, said that 70% of organizational changes fail, not because the change wasn't appropriate, the change wasn't necessary, or the change wasn't well planned. Those the transformation and organizational changes fail because they fail to take into the fact the human factor. Communication is the key here. You have to communicate change in a very clear and concise manner. So these are things you have to address, and you have to communicate to your staff and your patients why you're making this change. It has to be done in a clear, concise, convincing, and compelling manner. And these 4 questions, everyone in your staff has to be fluent in being able to answer. So let's talk about training your staff. This is a big step for a lot of your patients because your patients are used to a PPO. They're not used to co-pays. They are intimidated by the fact that you are no longer participating in your insurance plan. So a lot of time and a lot of energy should be focused on training your staff. This is where your staff can make or break you. A well-trained staff, they can field all those questions and concerns that your patients have. What's really helpful here is facilitating assignment of benefits. And you know what that is. That means that the insurance company, instead of reimbursing the patient, will send the benefit check to you. That's important because if you have a patient that's used to not paying anything out of pocket and all of a sudden they have to pay your full fee and then expect to be reimbursed by your insurance company, that's pretty intimidating to the patient. The other thing that I think that's very important here is encourage payment at the time of service. That is important because it gives your staff an opportunity to discuss any kind of discrepancies that may arise, to fully explain what their insurance benefit is, what their financial obligation is. It's important that you be transparent with all your financial transactions to your patients. So, there are a number of different ways that you can introduce this whole fee-for-service thing to your patients. And again, I like the term co-payment. Patients are comfortable with that. It's not intimidating. And again, I mentioned you may want to have a 2-tier fee schedule to avoid sticker shock. In other words, in the example I gave earlier, the only thing I started with was an increase in a dental prophylaxis. You saw how a simple $15 increase can be very, very profitable. Very few of your patients that are loyal to your practice. Remember, your patients are familiar with you. They don't want to go see another provider. They're comfortable with your staff. They know where to park. They know the location of your office. They know the habits of your office. So consider having an abbreviated fee schedule for those patients. You're doing it already with them. You're accepting a lower fee. So why not start with a two-tier fee schedule and then gradually work up so that eventually you increase to your usual and customary fee. I like to offer discounts. Patients love the word discount. You can have senior citizen discounts. You can have military discounts. First line provider discounts. Whatever you choose to do, that is very, very helpful. But what's really, really helpful and really important to the success of your transformation is you should have your staff trained with prepared, rehearsed answers to patient questions. You want to have all your staff answering those questions appropriately and all on board saying the same thing. So this is a question that you're going to get. Do you accept insurance when a patient calls? Well, there you go. Yes, of course we accept insurance. However, we're not preferred providers in your plan. That's a very common question. Or you'll get a call from an existing patient saying, oh, can you please transfer my records, or can you please send me your records? And you say, well, why why are you leaving our practice? They say, because you don't take our insurance. Well, the answer is, yes, we do take your insurance. However, we're not preferred provider. It's very important that your staff have a accurate answer to that question. Another question is, well, what does it mean that you're not a preferred provider anymore? Well, you should have an answer to that. Again, it's important to train your staff. I spent hours and hours rehearsing these questions so that every staff member, from a front desk person to a hygienist, can answer that question. And of course, patients, they want to know the impact. Well, be open with that discussion. I think pre-treatment estimates are essential to fee-for-service practices. It gets out in front of what patients owe. Or your staff, again, in their training, should know how to apply for, pre-treatment estimates. We send a letter out once that pre-treatment estimate is received from the insurance company, and that patient comes to our office knowing exactly what their financial obligation is. You never want a patient walking up to your front desk and being surprised with a big bill. That's just not going to be a good thing. Now you have to educate your patients. Why are you worth so much? The assumption from PPOs is that every dentist is the same. You get the same service. They reimburse every dentist the same. Every dental practice is the same. We all know that's not true. So it's important that you educate your patients about your practice and explain why your practice, why they can value your service. And don't be afraid to display why. This is my waiting room. I have plaques of achievements, plaques relating to continuing education, awards that I've received. You should do the same. Patients should be aware of what they're paying for, because if they value the service, patients will be willing to pay out of pocket. So don't be afraid to communicate these things. And if you have a website, that's a great avenue to do so. Some dentists actually send out newsletters, that sort of thing. But I find just the subtle, display of things, patients pay attention to that. In my practice, we do a lot of reconstructive dentistry. We do a lot of crown and bridge and ceramic metal restorations. When a patient leaves my office after having a new crown placed, they leave with a bag of their models, which, again, we sit down with them, we show them the models, we show, what makes a good preparation, why their restoration is going to last a long time. And on the outside of the bag of the model, I have a sticker that the lab provides me that shows the content of the material that we're using. I want those patients to know we're using a high noble metal that contains at least 40% gold, and that we're using a high quality alloy. That's important that they know what they're paying for. We also, make them aware of all the technology that we're constantly investing in. Whether you have an, we have an iCat cone beam machine. We have a Nomad handheld X-ray unit. We have scanners that we use for impressions. And of course we have, digital imaging and digital radiography. That all costs money. Patients should be aware of the technology you're investing in, because it's perceived that they're getting better care. This is kind of a controversial slide, and in fact, I've spoken to many people about it. In our office, we charge a COVID-19 fee. It's a fee to offset some of the added expense for PPE. If you're a fee-for-service practice, you can do it. If you are a PPO practice, you cannot charge a COVID fee, because all insurance companies bundle the cost of PPE and the cost of sterilization and the cost of OSHA protocol. They bundle it into whatever service you provide. In fact, the ADA approached a lot of payers and asked them to stop bundling the procedure and make it a non-covered procedure. This way it would be billable to the patient to help offset the expense that dentists are incurring during this time. This alone, in my opinion, is reason to drop out of a PPO. And by the way, I've gotten virtually no pushback on this COVID fee. Every time a patient comes into our office and has a procedure, there's a COVID fee attached to that procedure. And, you know, patients see what we've done. We've made it clear to them. We've done all these things to make it safe for them. So they see that COVID-19 fee as an investment in their personal safety. Well, price equals perceived value. You know, if you're getting something done for nothing, how much do you really value that procedure? If it's for free, you know, maybe you don't value it as much. The contra to that is if you feel that that product, whether it's a handbag, an automobile, or a service, and you think it's valuable, well, you're willing to pay for that value. Price equals perceived value. That's important in fee-for-service dentistry. You want your patients to perceive that service as valuable. So let's talk about sustaining your success. We've gotten this far. We've come up with a strategy. We started implementing that strategy, and now we have to sustain that success. Well, let's look at what seems to be the problem. Dropping PPOs makes sense. It makes perfect sense if you from this webinar, and it seems so simple. Well, what gives dentists pause are what we call self-limiting beliefs. Self-limiting beliefs are this subconscious voice that you hear that, if left, you know, unchecked, can become real boundaries to moving forward. Dentists, you know, I talk to them, we develop a strategy, we are ready to implement that strategy, then all of a sudden, a dentist just can't pull the trigger on taking the step. Why? It's all because of self-limiting beliefs. And this is where professional coaching comes in. Coaching is it's very different from consulting. Coaching is the ability to help others come to their own conclusion and solve their own problems. A good coach isn't going to tell you what to do. A good coach is going to help facilitate a thought process that allows you to make a decision that's going to be best for you. Working again with a company like Schein, they have coaching available. Again, I can't understate the value of working with a full service provider. This is where coaching really gets challenged, because fear is an emotion that's, you know, generated from a perceived danger or threat. And fear sometimes can be the driving force behind these self-limiting beliefs. You know, I talk to dentists all the time, and the big three is a fear of losing patients, you know, a fear of patients making less money, but the biggest fear of all is the fear of failure. As a professional coach, trying to overcome that fear is a very challenging thing, because it's a guttural emotion. It's a very deep-seated emotion. A good leadership and performance coach will try to bring that dentist from a state of a reactive state to a creative state. It's a very challenging thing. So how do you overcome it? Well, you got to trust the process. You've come up with a strategy, you've implemented that strategy, you train your staff, you've educated your patients, you've done all the things we talked about. You have to trust the process. What derails most success is these self-limiting beliefs driven by fear. So one of the things you have to do is you have to keep focus. You know, it's the lens that you're looking through with regard to your practice. Is it a micro lens or a macro lens? You know, a micro lens is a short-term thing. You're looking at your practice. You're seeing some patients leaving your practice. You have that feeling that this isn't going to work. But you got to look at the macro lens. You got to see where you want to be a month from now, a year from now, or 10 years from now. Because if you have your focus on the big picture, it's very easy for you to stay on track and be successful. So again, you know, when we talk about success, most of your success really relies on patient retention and growth. Retaining your existing patients. You have a terrific patient base right now. You happen to be a provider in their PPO. Well, if you can retain those patients and transform your practice into a fee-for-service, you know, practice, those patients become a valuable resource. So you have to reinforce periodically why you're worth it. Again, it's the price equals perceived value. You can do this a number of ways. Again, you can list things on your website, continuing education courses you've done, new technology you've invested in, new services you're providing, renovations you've done to make the delivery care more comfortable and more efficient for your patients. I find actually the greatest source of reinforcing what makes my practice unique is my dental hygienist, because she's got a captive audience. A patient having their teeth cleaned is going to be sitting in that chair for 45 minutes, and I have all my hygienists trained to discuss some of the new things we want to communicate to our patients. And we found that to be an effective means of patient retention. Another thing you want to do that's really important to your success is to cultivate referrals and encourage new patients. Some dental practices actually reward other patients for referring patients. You also have to, if you're a specialty practice, speak to your referring dentist and again, maintain that avenue of a source of new patients. That's important. This is my mantra. You know, dentistry is a business like any business, and you have to be able to change. Business is dynamic. So I really believe that you should spend 2 hours a week working on your business rather than in your business. It's very important that you keep your finger on the pulse and you see what changes are happening in your practice and what changes are happening around you. What are the trends in dentistry? Read the newsletters. Find out, you know, what's out there, what your patient's perception of things. Probably the simplest example is tooth whitening. I mean, when tooth whitening hit the scene, it just exploded. I think, you know, in the course of a day, I don't have a patient that doesn't come in that's asking me about whitening agents, new whitening products. They heard something on TV, they read something in a magazine. It's important that you be able to respond to those questions and incorporate, you know, those revenue producing procedures into your practice. So, you know, you talk about, you know, a successful practice. Well, at the end of the day, it's about the bottom line. You know, profit is not a 4-letter word. You're entitled to make a profit. And in fact, a lot of businesses, the success of those businesses is measured by their profit. But you know, it's not all about the bottom line. I found being a fee-for-service dentist, it's very rewarding. My quality of life is that much better. I'm not doing the volume-based dentistry that I once did. I'm not worried about, conforming to all the restrictive, requirements of PPOs. I don't have to listen to PPOs dictate treatment by saying, well, we only cover alternative benefits, that sort of thing. It's really a quality of life issue. And this is something you have to ask yourself. I mean, if you're a young dentist and you have a career ahead of you, where do you want to be 10, 15, 20, 25, 35 years from now? Do you live to work or do you work to live? Fee-for-service dentistry allows you to live. The last thing I'm going to leave you with is an implementation checklist. This is pretty much a summary. It's a very brief summary of what we talked about. We covered a lot of material today, but if you take a picture of this slide, this kind of sums up what we talked about. And this is your, you can start on your journey to freedom from PPOs. Well, this is my contact information. In this, in the last, 50 or so minutes, we covered enough material that's usually covered in three 1-hour workshops and some, professional coaching in between. We condensed a lot of material. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I went through some things very quickly, which I'm sure deserve explanation. In a minute, I'm going to turn the floor over to Adam and I'll be happy to address questions, but I'm sure with all the people attending, we won't have a chance to answer all the questions. So please take down this contact information. Again, my name is Gary Light. My email address is there. The website that you can see is referred to as mddmdconsulting.com. And that is my cell phone number. Feel free to contact me or shoot me an email or shoot me a text. I'd be happy to answer any questions that don't get covered at the end of this session. Adam, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. This was all excellent information, and this is certainly a hot topic. And of course, we do have tons of questions, so we'll try to get through as many as we can with the remaining time. How can you charge a copay and not be in violation of your contract with the PPO?
No, you have to drop out of the PPO. So what I was going to say is that that's the strategy of dropping out of the PPO. So you're going to drop out of the PPO and you're afraid that all your patients are going to leave. Well, let's start with what I did. All I did was change one fee. So for a patient, they're not seeing any increase in what they're paying except for a $15 copay for a dental prophylaxis. You have to be out of the PPO in order to charge that copay.
If you're in network with PPOs, how are you contractually allowed to add a $15 copay? If we're out of network, why would we need the copay if we are collecting the full fee?
Oh, if you're collecting full fee, you don't have to. And again, you're not charging a copay to your usual and customary fee patients. What you're trying to do is you've been accepting a huge discounted fee contractually with your PPO. So now you want to bring your PPO patients up to your usual and customary fee. I've just found that if you jump from your usual, from your PPO fee to the usual customary fee for a patient who's not used to paying anything, and now all of a sudden the difference in the fee is $30 or $40 or $50, and then they have a husband or a wife or 3 kids. I mean, that's a big expense to them. So again, For your if you're at a network and you can get your usual and customary fee, don't mess with it. That's the one thing you want to look at, though, is you want to look at your zip code analysis to make sure you're competitive, because there may be some room to move there if in your zip code your fee is below average. Again, you want to be in the 80th percentile.
When you say co-payment, is it the amount you charge extra to the insurance fee?
No, when I say co-payment, that is what the patient's liability is, their financial obligation for that service. So say the PPO reimbursement fee for dental prophylaxis is $100. Now you drop the PPO and you decide to increase your fee to $115. We call that $15 obligation that the patient is responsible for as a copay.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions. Do you mind flipping back one slide to that chart again so people can take a look at that?
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's see. If the treatment route went different than the pre-estimate, what do you do in that case?
Yeah, well, you know, not everything goes according to plan, and you're absolutely right. Very often, say you're preparing a tooth and the tooth fractures during preparation, and now it requires a different procedure, an additional procedure. You know, we pretty much have a disclaimer with all our patients that, look, you know, this is the pre-treatment fee estimate. It's based on the diagnostic material currently available. There may be the need for some additional unforeseen treatment, which may even require a referral to a specialist, for which you'll be responsible, financially responsible. We put that on the bottom of every pre-treatment letter. Does it happen very often? It doesn't happen that often, but we do refer that from time to time. Classic example of that is a patient, you know, presents for, say, a crown restoration. You prepare the crown. Next thing you know, the patient's having pain, and now they have to go. They need a root canal. Well, you know, that's something totally unanticipated, but it's something that they're financially responsible for. And if they question it, we say, look, there was nothing to indicate that you needed it at the time. You're asymptomatic. There was nothing on the film to suggest that. It's unfortunate, but you are financially responsible.
What does the total dollar amount of a hygiene appointment look like if you drop a plan and add the copay?
Well, that comes into your zip code analysis. I really can't answer that because it's all over the country. I mean, if you're in New York City, I mean, your hygiene, your cost of doing business is a lot more than in Providence, Rhode Island. Or if you're in LA, or if you're in some rural part in Maine, it's all different. But that's where contact your full service provider in your area, and they will give you the information of what that average for every procedure, not just hygiene, but for what the average fee is for bite wings in your area, what the average fee is for appliance care, for periodic exams, etc. And then you can make that determination. I can't make that determination for you, but that information is readily available.
All right, we've got lots more questions, but a few minutes. How is it legal to charge your PPO patients a standard copay, but not charge it to the rest of your patients?
Well, again, you know, we're using copay as a semantics thing. So here's the problem we're having. Say our usual and customary fee for a prophylaxis is $125. And in Providence, I believe one of the biggest PPOs in Providence reimburses $89. Well, you know, the patient, you know, should be liable for the difference, which is $36 if you're going to charge the usual and customary fee. That's you know, for a patient who's not used to paying that may look like a big number. Again, especially if they have 3 kids, you know, who are they're responsible for. So what we do is we charge our usual customary fee patients the $125, which is our usual customary fee. Then we have our PPO patient walk to the front desk and we say, well, we're not in your network, so your copay for today is $15. So we're still getting less money than we normally would, than our usual customary fee, but we're getting $15 more than we would have gotten if we were participating in the PPO. That's the transition part of it. Then, the next year we may increase that. Again, we're using the term copay. All the copay is the difference between what we're intending to get and what their insurance company is paying.
I've got a couple follow-up questions to the zip code topic. The first one is, so why would you add a copay and not just charge the average fees of your zip code? And then the second question is, who do you contact to get the average fees in your zip code?
Well, again, you contact your full service provider. So, if you look at your supply, if you're working and you're just getting supplies out of a catalog and having your staff, go through supplies to save money, I'm all about that. That a lot of offices do that. But if you've got a full service provider, somebody like Henry Schein, you contact your Henry Schein rep and they can provide that information for you. I don't think the ADA provides that information. They don't like to talk about fees. They don't like to talk about codes, that sort of thing. So you have to go through, either a private entity or, like I say, Henry Schein is a full service provider. That's where you get that zip code information. With regard is, why don't you just charge all the patients the same fee? I think that you get a lot of pushback when you drop out of a PPO and you take these patients that have had absolutely, no expense out of pocket, and then you go to your usual and customary fee. Can you do it? Yes, you can. A lot of dentists do, and that's part of their strategy. If you think your patients will tolerate that. My experience has been, or at least in my case, if you gradually increase the fees. And again, I've been fee for service now since 2005. So over the last, 15, 16 years, I have gradually increased that co-payment. So now everybody pays my usual and customary fee. What's really wonderful about, this whole process is that once you have your patients on board, everybody walks up to the front desk on departure with their checkbook, and they're expecting to pay something. It just alleviates a lot of the hassle that you had when you were dealing with insurance companies.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time for tonight's webinar. I know we still have a lot of questions that were asked, and I will certainly pass all of those on to Dr. Light, and he will be able to respond to each of you in the next week or so. And of course, if you think of additional questions pertaining to this topic in PPOs, please feel free to, again, reach out directly to Dr. Light or email us at webinars@henryschein.com, and we will get back to you. Everyone attending tonight will receive a link to view the recording in the coming week via email. On behalf of Henry Schein Dental Business Institute, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Light, for your time, and thanks everyone for attending. Have a great evening.